Every single YouTuber out there is freaking out about the CGC drama with Pokemon cards, and I'm gonna tell you why. None of it's actually valid. If you want to not watch the TLDR, skip to this point of the video, you can watch my thoughts. But essentially, there were prototype cards, various types, that were sent to CGC in order to make sure that they were authenticated, and these prototype cards were the original of Pokemon cards, which, by the way, had metadata that was found out that they actually were not legitimate and were not real. Wow, end of story. Don't need to watch a 10-minute video. I think a lot of people are using these moments like this to pretty much essentially bash CGC and use them as a punching bag. There is a lot of Camp A, Camp B, Sony versus Microsoft, Sega versus Nintendo kind of mentality with this, and that's because people's cards that are in PSA, by the way, a lot of us have bias in these, I have PSA as well, right? So, and CGC, but there are people that are scared that their camp will be devalued, and essentially that's why you're seeing a lot of territorial beef between companies, but also between collectors. Now, I know we're going through a boom, so I gotta bring up a very familiar face here, and that is Logan Paul. And that's because during the original boom from COVID that we saw only a couple years ago, there was the authentication service, which was, I think, BBCE or something, BBCA, something like that, where that person came on to his video and said, I visually looked at this and this is a legitimate case. Now, from that, you would think, oh, well, they opened them up and there were a bunch of G.I. Joe cards in there and not actually Pokemon cards. And I will tell you that, yes, that could have hurt the brand, and yes, we're still talking about it today, but that company is still doing Pokemon, Magic, sports cards, and authenticating still. So yes, it is a blemish on their record, but it wasn't like they entirely just stopped doing business, and things do progress forward for stabilized businesses that do have credibility beyond their just one incident of this. I also want to make a little assumption here that me and you are Pokemon collectors if we're talking right now, but I will say, if you ask me about sports, baseball, wrestling cards, Lorcana, like all these different nuances between the characteristics of cards, what's rare, what isn't, these errors that you could be looking for, like this is what makes the hobby, that it can be quite difficult to be able to authenticate everything, and it is becoming more and more difficult. My second point here is CGC is the #2 leading grading service per stats last year. I'm not going to say that they are too big to fail, but I'm going to say they have a pretty good market share and probably do have a good resource of income and finances to recover from something like this. To include, they probably have insurance, they also have lawyers, and by the way, that is to represent them. And if you are wronged by this, you have a choice to handle it directly with them without lawyers and all that, or you could, and it's a variable and you have a right to do that. It does suck, but this is why there are legal jargons and documents and things we check box and agree to that a lot of us just read over, and you may not like the terms of service, but that's what they are to try and protect both parties. We all want to say that there is 100% stamp of approval, but they said there's 0.03% of all cards were affected by this, which means they do succeed more than they don't succeed, right? But I mean, it's just like a plane crash. Yes, there are thousands of flights every day that take off and land, but if one falls out of the sky, that's a bad day, right? Like, not as severe with cards, right? Like, we're not losing lives here, but I wanted to say, like, it is something you strive for 100%, but it will never be 100%, and that's something that we all accept at some level, and I think we need to understand and accept when we use these services. A lot of people are very upset that CGC has not come out and said, I'm gonna do exactly this, I'm gonna pay for everything right now, I'm gonna do this. Like, I believe that is kind of difficult for that to be the case, because there is a lot of money and legal stuff wrapped around in this. And I will say, ace grading that happened over in Europe, in the UK, that was a much smaller amount, but still there's a lot of drama from that. But I will commend them, they did pay out very quickly and rapidly, but I have to say that was out of their own accord. They could have definitely slowed down and done the whole legal thing. I think that is outside the status quo. So I will give Ace grading the pat on the back that they actually did a really good job for PR wise. But there are legal things and then social court systems that you guys get to decide, and kind of they always end up fighting or feuding between the court of public opinion and then also like the actual courts, for example. I want to say, I know some people will laugh at this, but there are a lot of people that would agree with this, that CGC has a better grading experience, and that's typically because people have said consistency, which that's what I've read, my anecdotal that I've seen, is what the consistency is. And then on top of that, they have a set grading fee, which does not go up when it goes with a card that could be perceived as a higher value and all these tacked on things. And that's kind of why a lot of people are fans of CGC, and also turnaround times and things like that can be nice. And I would say, if anything, us as collectors should want the competition like that to continue on. And if anything, I think this will make CGC better and grading services in general better. The next point I have here is this is a 100% human system between the people that receive your cards, set them up, grade them, ship them out. You're human as well. I know it's hard to like put that in your brain that these companies are people. And I'm not trying to sit here and give them a pass, but I'm trying to say these are humans, first off. So there will be errors because there are humans involved. There will be errors because that human system is prone to some kind of error because we are innately flawed, right? While I do believe tech such as AI and things like that could be implemented to try and mitigate some of this and take some of the human factor out of it, hopefully, and make this easier, yes, but we're still in the infancy of that as well. We have to respect, out of the millions upon millions of cards, collectibles, whatever else, I'm surprised these stories are not way more common than what we're seeing right here, because it's just such a high volume. And with that volume, I want to tell people we cannot be the same collectors that sit here and we're like, oh, I know this card has a little whitening right here. I submit it anyway, hoping that the human, right, the human that's looking at it will probably overlook that and maybe give me a 10 versus a 9, right? Like, we do that and we know that we're trying to play the system, but we also respect and understand the system could also flip to the other side, and then we get mad about it and we're all upset, and sometimes rightfully so, where we're like, objectively, you can look at that and see, why does that have that grade? I do understand that. I do think we need to balance those inconsistencies with this and kind of give some margin of error, for example. Now what I'm going to say is, I know there's a lot of beef, as I said earlier in the video, of these different grading companies, and I related this to Sega, Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox, right? And as those market shares shift and change, the perception of these will change, especially as we see some of the grading and inconsistencies that can happen that can make you as a consumer choose one versus the other. And that's kind of where we're seeing right now, where some cards in a CGC Pristine 10 versus a PSA 10 have disparities and overlap and things like that. And this is how the market's just going to shake out. Now, I will say, I think we will start seeing consistency across the board as far as pricing goes with this shakeout in market share. And I believe you as a consumer will probably have less of an issue with different grading services as time goes on. I do believe that this has been made difficult because we are a global collection of collectors, where like sending a card from the UK, I understand why Ace is over there. I understand that sending stuff from Canada or from Australia can be quite difficult, and that's why these things are popping up as well. And I think that the competition will need to somehow undermine that, like what Ace is doing, for example. And PSA, they're sitting back fat in their happy pockets, and they're stoked because they have the most market share ever. And unfortunately, when they are not worried about business coming in, they're not going to change a lot of policies for consumer approval or consumer satisfaction, for example. And so we can make that decision as well if you would like something better. And I would say, I think the grading costs could go down, and we should do some kind of implementation of that. And I do believe that the market will mature, and as we see more examples of, for example, if I have a CGC version of this Gyarados versus an Ace versus a Beckett versus whatever, and start looking at those, that we are going to see greater consistencies of grading. And that's why I think CGC did switch their grading system as well. And also, I believe that I could say we're going to see more examples of that. And as time goes on and you see more of these different grading scales and things like that, and what's coming out of them, it's going to only give greater legitimacy or understanding of what you're getting out of each one of these. And we're just in the infancy of this. But let me know what you guys think about the CGC drama down in the comments below. Are you going to go back with them? If not, what are your thoughts with PSA? We've heard complaints on both camps. I'm not here to take one side or the other. I was just trying to like give some thought-provoking things that I think a lot of people were not doing.